Ukraine is expanding its energy war against Russia, striking oil assets far from the front line. What does this mean for Moscow's war budget and global energy markets? Joining me is Dr. Thomas O'Donnell, an American energy and geopolitics strategist based in Berlin. Dr. O'Donnell, it's a long time no see, so I'm happy to see you again in our studio.
It's always a pleasure to be on Canal 24 with you, Nataliia.
So let's start with the Caspian Sea. Ukrainian long-range drones have now hit a third Russian oil production platform owned by Lukoil, as well as a nearby military petrol ship. From your perspective, as an energy analyst, how serious is this damage? Are these platforms being temporarily disrupted, or are we talking about real long-term losses for Russia?
Yes, well, it's both. The Caspian Sea platforms in and of themselves don't produce a very high percentage of Russian oil, but this is part of a systematic campaign. It's like one battle in a big campaign. And if I may, I've been advocating and describing for close to 2 years that the former method that was used under the Biden administration and also under the early Trump administration of the oil price caps on Russia was not an effective policy from the beginning, and it was a very mild policy. So there's been a change. The price cap is essentially gone. There's a new policy, and that policy is very severe sanctions and also tariffs on India, for example, for buying American oil. So from the American side and from the Europeans, and especially from the Brits, there's very severe sanctions of a type that really haven't ever been imposed on a great power before, like on Russia. On the other side, of course, what you're describing is a very complex military campaign by Ukraine, an air campaign involving drones and missiles that is first it was systematically hitting refineries, which had effect domestically on Russia for cutting back their ability to refine oil and so forth. But also, now they've started to hit ports, and that's quite interesting. That's ramped up, and especially the port of Novorossiya, and that's very significant. That's one of the biggest westward-facing ports that Russia has for exporting oil. The other ones are in the Baltic. Novorossiya, of course, is in the Black Sea. The other two are in the Baltic. And then starting to hit shadow fleet ships, Russian ships who are coming in empty to load up oil. So what I think is going on here, if you put these two campaigns together, the American sanctions plus the military hits by the Ukrainians, and we know from reports from October and before in the press that American intelligence supports these air attacks and had been coordinating and assisting with them. I look at this as one total campaign against the Russian oil sector. This famously, Senator McCain said before he died in the United States, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a state. And the senators, at least in the United States, and certain people in the administration feel very strongly the only way you really stop Russian aggression long term, not only the war right now going on, but aggression in other places and its ability to hit other post-Soviet countries and start a war again, is to undermine its oil sector. So I think there's people have realized it is possible to do this. I could describe why technically it is possible to really ruin a lot of Russia's oil fields in the long run if this campaign continues in a joint way. And that's what we're going to have to see now. Will that be up to the next stage?
You said a gas station pretending to be a state.
That's what John McCain famously called it, Senator McCain, before he died in an interview one time. And that is repeated so often by American senators. Right now, as you probably well know, there's a bill that's been in the American Senate since at least June. They were talking about it in May. It had, just from the beginning, it had overwhelmingly 83 senators out of 100 sponsored the bill. The two main sponsors who introduced it are Senator Lindsey Graham, who's a Republican, and of course, Senator Richard Blumenthal, who's a prominent Democrat. It's a completely bipartisan bill. These two have been like a pair. okay, going around to all the think tanks in Washington, going on all the television in the United States and saying things like this. Russia is a gas station pretending to be a state. If you want to stop its aggression, its ability to make aggression in Ukraine or anywhere, you have to take away its ability to produce oil to enjoy these oil rents, right? Which it gets. And that is what exactly I see this bill that they introduced in the Senate. They call it, both senators equally call it bone crushing sanctions. They've also said it's a draconian bill, okay? And essentially what it would do is any country that continued to take Russian oil at all, that country, not just the companies in that country or not just the banks, that country, all its exports to the United States would have a tariff of 500%. It's quite extreme. That's why they call it draconian. The only exceptions would be made if that country was making contributions to the military efforts of Ukraine. If they give money to Ukraine, they might make an exception. So to me, this is the ultimate sanction bill. I'm not complaining about the sanctions that Trump has so far put on. They've been quite dramatic. Lukoil, right, Rosneft, and before that, Biden had sanctioned a couple smaller ones, and they're being enforced from what I can see. But this would be the next step. And this is what we're all waiting to see, how Trump looks at the negotiations that just finished this Saturday in Miami between Jared Kushner, Rubio, Witkoff on the American side, your negotiator on your side, Mr. Umanoff, and also Mr. Kirill Dimitrov from the Russian side. If Trump is very dissatisfied with the outcome of this, he said he will sign this bill, but the bill has been put on hold during this negotiation, latest round of negotiations. He earlier said, give me the bill, I'll sign it. But it was put on hold. If he sees these negotiations as being basically a waste of time or that Putin hasn't seriously budged, this is the next step that he should implement. Now, let me just say, when there was a meeting in Brussels almost 2 weeks ago, where all the European leaders met with Witkoff to summarize what had happened, the negotiations in Berlin, we could talk about, which were very positive for the West, I would say, because the West got its act together, got its demands together, and were unified, at least more unified now in facing Russia, and that's very good. But at that meeting, at that time in Brussels, the American Commerce Secretary, Mr. Bessent, Treasury Secretary, it's the Treasury Department that implements the sanctions, that's responsible for them. He briefed the European leaders, this was like a week and a half before this meeting in Florida, saying, if this doesn't go well, if the Russians don't make concessions or don't look serious, we already have another set of sanctions ready to impose on them against other Russian companies in the oil sector and against a number of shadow fleets. So Europe has been briefed, the Americans are ready, and then he said, of course, we just wait for the okay from Mr. Trump, depending on how the meeting goes. So there's these two things. There's sanctions that have already been prepared by the Treasury Department that should be announced quite soon, I hope, because the meeting didn't go that well. I don't see the Russians had any big concessions. Or they actually go along with Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, which is sort of the nuclear option, the draconian level. But this is how it's going. And this can really, I would say, this is another thing we could discuss. It is possible, I believe, to really crush the Russian oil production capacity, its petrostate long term, if this is done right.
Right. And the New York Times says Ukraine has opened effectively a second front at sea.
Yes.
Just far away from the front line. And now we
Yes.
are not just talking about the deep strikes inside Russia, but,
Yes.
you know, in a different directions, thousands kilometers away from Ukraine and from Russia. Do you agree this is no longer just a symbolic, but, you know, a new phase of the war?
Well, yes. In a way, there's been many new phases. The drone campaign
Yes.
has been very audacious against the oil sector. I mean, there's drone campaign against many things. But against the oil sector, the Russian oil sector, it's been very audacious and very creative and very successful. And I want to point out, just for political reasons, it's clear that this is coordinated with the Americans and American intelligence. Your intelligence chief just this Friday, I think it was, had an interview with the press talking about how much assistance your country gets in intelligence and satellite reconnaissance from the Americans, much of which actually comes from commercial satellite companies. So my point being, this drone campaign is not something the Americans do not approve of. They clearly approve of it. Okay, that's different than what happened earlier in the later Biden administration. This is a big change. There's no complaint when Ukrainian drones and missiles repeatedly hit Novorossiya and now hit the ships in the Black Sea, and now hit ships, I think what you're referring to, in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, what I find just very interesting about this, if you want to shut down the Russian oil export system, which I believe is possible, what you have to do is, on the one hand, you have to hit the ports and the refineries. When you hit the refineries, they have to export more oil because they can't refine it. And that's been happening. Now, there's a glut in the market also. So for at least 2 or 3 months, all of Russia's export terminals, the main ones that face west, Novorossiya in the Black Sea, Primorsk, and Ust-Lunga in the Baltic, those are the really the big ones, the important ones. They've been running at 100% capacity. They essentially can't export any more oil. And when the sanctions were put on by the Americans, they had nowhere to send. They wanted to get rid of the oil. They needed to move it out. They have to. And there's not enough customers because of the sanctions, but also because there's a glut of oil in the market. So Russia has been loading oil onto ships that a lot of them have nowhere to go. And the amount of Russian oil that's floating on the water is 40% higher now than it was in August. Worldwide, there's like 1 billion barrels, including the Russian, floating there. So Russia has this problem. It can't get the oil. It's starting to get to the point where it can't get the oil out. Okay, so hitting Novorossiya and the ships going to was important, but the Ukrainians had to do something about Primorsk and Ust-Lunga, and that's pretty far away. They can hit those ports, but I thought this was brilliant. I hadn't thought of this. The ships, a lot of them, have to go through around Europe, through the Mediterranean, and then the Suez Canal, so they can hit them in Eastern Mediterranean. This was a ship, I believe, that was going on its way to Ust-Lunga, and it got hit. So this is very positive, and what I think will happen, another tranche in sanctions, another upping of this air campaign against the ports and refineries. Pretty soon Russia can't export the oil, and what do they have to do? It's going to be the middle of winter, very cold. West Siberia is where the overwhelming majority of Russian oil comes from, and Siberia is cold, very cold. Those are very old fields, 50, 60, 70 years old, very delicate fields. If you have to shut them rapidly in the wintertime without very carefully flushing fluids through that dilute the oil and flushing oil out of the pipes, even then it's difficult to get them going again. But if they have to shut a number of these fields rapidly in the winter, they will probably be permanently damaged. It will really undermine the future ability of Russia to be a petrostate. And I think this is where this campaign is going, if Trump chooses to go to the next stage.
Right. Dr. O'Donnell, but by striking so far beyond the Black Sea, what message is Ukraine sending, not only to Russia, because to Russia we understood, but to energy markets in general?
Well, this is quite interesting. First of all, it's interesting. Nobody in Europe, none of the allies, the Americans, the Europeans, or for that matter, the OPEC states, the Gulf states, who are very central to this, nobody has said they don't have a right to strike these. Some are upset, okay, but they don't say it's a war. And in a war, you can hit the ships of the other country. Wherever you want, you can hit them. So there's no problem there as far as what this says. Now, what this says to markets, normally the case in the market would be that if somebody starts hitting Russian ships that carry oil, Russia was a very high percentage, maybe close to 10% of the world's oil was being produced in Russia. And the West would always try to, this was the idea of the price caps. They would say, oh my God, we can't take Russian oil off the market. The price would spike everywhere. All the governments in the West would have problems. It would only be a direct war, maybe with the United States and Russia, where such a thing would be done. That was the mentality. That was the mentality left over from the Cold War. But right now, we have a special time in the international oil system. There's a glut of oil. There's much more oil being produced and able to be produced and on the market than is needed. China every month is buying about 1 million barrels of oil and just putting it in storage, or the glut would be even worse. So the price is coming down. Everybody thought $60 a barrel would be the bottom, right? Now they're talking about the price going into the 50s. This is stunning. I mean, they're taking Russian oil off the market. They're also taking Venezuelan oil off the market. They're taking Iranian oil off the market. And as the sanctions hit Russia, after a little shock of a day or two, the price goes down. It's not what anybody would expect. So there's very good objective conditions to really hit Russia hard and to think about taking it off the market. OPEC has, on paper, about 6 million barrels that they could still put on the market. So even if they have 4 or 5, I mean, Russia's exporting something like 3.4 now by sea. Even if it took that all offline, it can be replaced. So this is a very good objective conditions in the market for doing this to Russia finally. It should be taken advantage of.
Dr. O'Donnell, and Bloomberg also reports that Russia's oil export revenues have fallen to their lowest level since early 2023, but I've heard somewhere even since 2022. So is this just temporary turbulence, or it's the beginning of something deeper and huge problems?
That's what I'm saying. Russia is its oil sector is the West, Ukraine and its allies are going after the Russian oil sector now in a much more rational way, a much more effective way than they ever did with the oil price cap. It's both very effective sanctions and military attacks on their infrastructure. And yes, it's being very effective. The amount of oil that they're able to sell is going down. And the price they have to offer, if you're in India, if you're in China, those two countries are having 85% of the imports of Russian oil just before these latest sanctions were put on. If you're in one of those countries and want to buy Russian oil, you're taking a big risk. And so they're demanding big, big cuts in the price, reductions in the price. Latest thing I saw is maybe West Ural's oil was going for something, it's hard to say really because it's very hidden, something like $35 a barrel. Now it always sells for a little bit less than the world price, but that's considerably below the
yeah, absolutely.
price. Okay? Now here's the thing, and I'll just say in March 2020, a very ill-advised oil war was started by Russia, by Sechin. Putin agreed to Sechin's plan to attack American shale. He thought he could dump Russian oil on the market just when Corona was starting, drive the price down, put American shale out of business, and undermine the ability of Americans to sanction the Russians. It was a very badly made plan. The Saudis crushed them in a couple days, and they had to surrender and stop. But at that time, what they said when they made their plan, they said they could stand about $25 a barrel as long as they had at that time $600 billion, I think it was, in their reserves. The reserves are down quite a bit, and that 35 is getting close to 25. Okay, so, and now they're waging a war. They weren't waging a war there. So they're starting to get very close to the level where they're not really going to be making much of any profit, or not. It's not a matter of making a profit on the field, not making the levels they need to feed the state to continue. So it's getting very close to there. That's why I think the Americans should go to the next stage with these sanctions, the Senate sanctions, and also assist the Ukrainians in going to the next stage in hitting the oil from these various ports.
Yeah, but maybe Russia will not be interested in a profit for some period of time, but as you said,
Yes,
it will
yes,
be interested in saving those tubes in winter
yes,
for them.
yes,
So
yeah.
just
And the fields themselves
and
are
yeah,
very
yeah,
low in heavy oil, and it's cold,
hmm
and the oil is like oil going through. You can imagine like
and
oil going through sand. If it slows down, it's hard to get it going, and then if it's winter, good luck,
good luck.
right?
Yes.
And it does permanent damage because that oil has been moving for a couple generations. If you stop it, you have to even now push it by injecting water all around very carefully and to push that oil to the well. So these are very delicate wells.
Yes, Dr. O'Donnell, was Iran actually stopping its oil production for some period of time, but because of the weather conditions, it didn't have
Yeah.
such problems?
Yes, they don't have the same problems. It's a different geology. Well, you're right, it's warmer. That's certainly a factor. But in their geometry, in their geology, what they need to inject is not so much water. They need to inject natural gas to push it. And so they have problems, even though they have some of the biggest natural gas fields in the world, they have to use a lot of it to inject in their wells in order to get their oil out. But their production is way down right now. The Americans are also going after them very hard with sanctions and against their shadow fleet also.
I don't know much about the Iran economy right now after years and decades of sanctions from the United States. I don't know what was the impact of it.
It's they have a very serious problem. Plus, the oil that they do sell, it's the same problems the Russian have. The price of oil in the world is going down, and then they have to give a premium discount in order for people to take their risky oil. China was taking almost all the Iranian exports, as well as Venezuela. It was mainly China who's taking their otherwise sanctioned oil. But the economy is in very bad conditions in Iran. Just the other day, I think it was the prime minister met with students, and students were very upset about the economy, about their future, not having jobs. And he says, "Look, I'm running out of ideas. I come here, I talk to the students. You have any ideas for the prime minister? You let me know. We're really stuck." And that's quite an admission, I think.
And you know what's worrying me? That we see quite a strange situation. Russia keeps fighting, but struggles to sell its oil normally, as you said. Is this a sign that Moscow has adapted to this gray survival model?
Well, yes. I mean, Putin doesn't have to face any real elections, nor most of his most of the other people who occupy office in Russia. So they don't worry in the same way that a democracy would, right? But conditions are obviously very difficult in Russia. My understanding is because of the reduction in the oil money, but also the tremendous amount of money going to the war economy, that things are getting harder. He can't offer the same amount of money to convince people to join the military as he could before, and all the social services are much harder. So it's a very difficult situation in Russia. And I mean, I think here's the thing. Um, for example, Trump, I think he realized he offered Putin, let me back up a minute. He offered Putin all sorts of enticements to end the war. He came in very much with this sort of real estate mogul's idea. If I offer him a good deal, we'll offer him big economic deals with the United States. We'll give him some Ukrainian territory, and he'll see that this is a great deal and he'll end the war. Well, it didn't work that way. Trump got an education into what was about Putin, maybe. And about April or May, it seemed pretty clear that the cabinet in the United States and Trump were talking about. I mean, Trump even said to the media, well, I guess I have to inflict pain to get the war to end. I have to inflict pain. That doesn't mean he still won't want to make economic deals to enticements, but he decided to inflict pain. And the two things clearly are to guarantee weapons to Ukraine, and wanting the Europeans to pay for it. The Europeans dealt with that. It was a big drama, but they dealt with that this week. They're going to continue paying to help the Ukrainian budget and to help the Ukrainians buy weapons. That's settled for the next couple of years. So that was one pressure point, one way to exert pain on Russia. The other thing, to me, seemed to be sanctions, especially sanctions on the oil sector to undermine the oil sector. And that's moving along quite well, and it should be brought to the next level. The problem is Putin does not feel sufficient pain yet on the battlefield. Not that he's doing great, but he doesn't feel sufficient pain there yet. He has a lot of rockets. He has a certain amount of money to continue the war. So these things have to be offset. And what I'm talking about with the oil sanctions and with the weapons, of course, is one means of offsetting all that and making it where he doesn't see the logic in continuing the war, that he's not going to move forward. And that's what, I think that's what the West, not only the Americans, the Ukrainians, and the Europeans are hoping for to get to that situation.
Yeah, and you're speaking about that one. If we look at everything together, Ukrainian strikes, falling
Yeah.
prices, US sanctions, and those that probably will be imposed someday, are we
Yes.
approaching a real turning point, or can Russia still sustain the way it's acting for years?
Yeah. Well, that's the idea, that taking this away changes the nature of Russia. If you really destroy their ability to export oil, maybe long term, Russia's economy was always sort of the level of Brazil's. How the heck can they do all this stuff? They're not a high-tech country. They have many, many, many problems. But one way they can do this is, as I said before, they're a gas station masquerading as a state. They get oil rents. It doesn't take many workers to produce oil. I mean, they have tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 to produce it, yes. But for the amount of money you get from it, to do that through innovation and factories would be very difficult to get this huge amount of money when the price of oil is up. So that's the basis of the Russian petrostate, that it can be this sort of mini superpower causing all these problems in the whole post-Soviet sphere, and particularly in Ukraine. And the idea is to try to take this economic base, this energy base away from them and knock them down a notch where they can't engage in these sorts of things.
But unfortunately, I've heard that a lot of analysts and media outlets like Bloomberg, they're saying that Russia's economy is really weakening. But that alone won't stop and won't push Putin toward peace. Do you agree with that?
It depends. You could have a severe crisis where it gets really bad. It's clear that the oil sector is collapsing. This would really shock and scare a lot of people in the whole oligarchy there, because they know that's the whole future wealth of the country. And if they could lose that. So I can't guarantee. It's like when soldiers go into battle, Ukrainian soldiers, they sacrifice themselves in a battle. There's no guarantee that that battle will be the crucial battle, but they know that everything adds up together. So I can't guarantee that undermining the oil sector would end the war rapidly, but it's one of the biggest hits I can imagine,
Yeah, absolutely.
besides battlefield advances.
Yeah, that's a serious cracks in their
Yeah,
system.
and they have serious problems. You're absolutely right. They have serious problems.
Well,
And
I hope for something will change their behavior in a
yeah.
visible future.
Yeah.
Dr.
Well,
O'Donnell,
I hope they pass this bill in Congress. They will. If Trump doesn't look well on these negotiations, which I think they didn't produce anything positive that we've heard about from the Russian side, which is what we all expected. That Trump now takes the next step. He puts the sanctions. He briefed the Europeans on that he's got sanctions in his pocket, ready to go. He should put the new sanctions, but he should talk to Lindsey Graham and Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal and say, okay, go ahead with your bill, put it on my desk, and I'll sign it. And that would be a big notch up in the oil war against Russia.
Dr. O'Donnell, when Trump wanted to sign a mineral deal with Ukraine, we didn't have time to blink our eyes when he did it.
Yeah.
So all these sanctions, all this question about the bill, I don't know. It so goes against the American administration right now.
Well, I would say it's a little more complicated. Okay.
Right.
In the United States, especially on the Republican and MAGA side, but also on the Democratic side, the country starts to realize, we're in a new position. The United States was always sort of like the second Saudi Arabia. We produced so much oil. But since the 1970s, that was declining. And then the Middle East became much more important. And all the geopolitical entanglement in the Middle East because it became the center of the world oil system. Well, suddenly, with fracking, first in natural gas and then in oil, since about 2005 in gas and 2007 in oil, the United States now has become the biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. It's also an energy superpower. So what that's done is in political and some business elites in the United States, they start thinking about, well, we should use this power. We should use this power in the national interests of the United States. So in the Trump cabinet, there's two people who are very involved in energy, two secretaries. One is Chris Wright, he's the energy secretary. And the other is, I'm blanking on his name for a minute, I'll tell you in a second. I'll tell you his name in a second. Anyway, the two of them, they're on this U.S. Energy Dominance Committee. It's not a very nice name. It's sort of chauvinist, right? But the idea is to use energy as a geoeconomic lever against the enemies of the United States. So these guys are particularly on board, from what I can see, this idea of using sanctions against Russia, not only to solve the Ukrainian war, but to just get rid of this problem of Russia causing problems all over the world for the United States and its allies. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So I have to say, some of these guys, we have a dictator in Venezuela. I was 2 years in Venezuela teaching there and so forth, doing research. This guy is a real dictator, and he should be removed. But sometimes they do talk in terms, they sound like imperialists, the way they talk about what they're going to do, what Trump talks about. But the point is, they realize now they have this power in oil and gas to go and hit the Iranians, hit the Venezuelans, and hit the Russians. And they seem to be willing to use it. And you're absolutely right. Trump moderates it somewhat because he looks at relationship between Russia and China and various other things. But in the elites in the United States, in the Senate, it's overwhelming, right? And in the cabinet, you see the people engaged in energy. It's very strong also. So underneath, there's a tremendous sentiment to do these things against Russia. And so Trump is sitting on a little bit of a volcano.
Dr. O'Donnell, thank you so much for your, I would say, summary, because we're recording it almost at the end of the year. And it was a great pleasure. So Dr. Thomas O'Donnell, an American energy and geopolitical strategist based in Berlin, was with me in studio of Channel 24.
Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!